Right, well, last week there was a report people might have seen called Sex and Power, which actually showed that the position of women in Britain was going backwards. That actually we had been 33 in the world of political representation for women, women in parliament, in the judiciary, in the health service, you name it. Now we're 60th. There's only 2 other countries in Europe that are worse than us, Western Europe. So, the sort of the sense of actually women's position in society, that there's still a lot to fight for. I mean, there's only 22% of women in parliament. The number of women in the cabinet's gone right down under the Tories. Not surprising when they're a bunch of public school boys, but that sense of, women's positions in society isn't something that just ever onwards and upwards incrementally gets better. There can be retreats, there can be things that push women's position back. Obviously, things like low pay. It's still unequal pay, even though we're decades after a law making unequal pay illegal. Sexist advertising is still absolutely out there, and in I think more explicit and more sexist even than what would have been allowed, when I was growing up as a teenager, whether it's in colleges and everything else. And I'm sure nobody's missed the story this weekend about the t-shirts being sold on Amazon. Keep calm and hit her, keep calm and knife her, keep calm and rape a lot, keep calm and punch her. Now they say these were randomly generated by a computer, but the fact that anybody let it get as far as being sold on on Amazon, I think tells you something about how little people felt that was problematic. And so when you look at those aspects, you can see that sexism in popular culture and everything else is still very much with us. Certainly in some things that you would have thought we had won and could be confident that weren't going to be pushed backwards were things like abortion rights. I think abortion rights are very severely in danger, if you like, at the moment, and people will, in some places, will have seen pickets by bigots and the 40 Days people and everything else. But the fact that we now have a Minister for Health who wants the time limit to come down from 24 weeks to 12 weeks is, I think, something that is incredibly scary. And Maria Miller, the Tory Equalities Minister, if you like. I mean, it's really the two things don't go together. Maria Miller, Equalities Minister, but she wants to bring down the time as well for abortion rights. So the sense that something that we thought we'd won, and actually there was years where there wasn't any attacks, is something I think we've got to be very, very aware of. And when it comes to what's happening with the austerity attacks, they disproportionately affect women and working class women. The TUC has calculated that women will pay about 72% of the changes in tax and credits. That's 72% of the cuts, if you like, will disproportionately affect women. And for that, read working class women. And 2/3 of the 140,000 jobs that have been axed or in the process of being axed in the public sector are jobs that women do. And that's because over 2/3 of the public sector, the majority of public sector jobs are done by women. Part of that is just a coincidence of when women came into the workforce, but also it's about some of the jobs and some of the areas of work where women can find work. The sense I think today is that therefore some arguments feel the same as they might have been 20, 30 years ago, but they're taking place in quite a different context. They may seem familiar, but I think a new generation growing up today grows up with very different expectations than a woman growing up in the 50s or in the 60s. And I think that sense of, women grow up today expecting to be financially independent, expect to work, having had children, expect not to face blatant discrimination, whether they're going for a job or going to be at college or anything else, and expect to have children regardless of whether they're married or not. This is something that, back in the 50s, was something that was something, really, really somebody felt the shame and were ostracized. And that's why so many stories you read about women trying to find children that they gave up for adoption, really forced to, because to bring up a child on your own was something that was really seen as unacceptable. All of those things are very, very different today. So I think with anything, when we're talking about the situation for women today, we have to recognise there's been advances, that it isn't, that there has been real and concrete advances for women in modern day society. But that's not to take for granted any of them. None were given to us. We fought for them. Everything, whether it's people fighting for the vote, fighting for the right to have, even by law, even if it's not in reality, equal pay, the fight for abortion rights, all of these things came with a fight from below. But it means that any discussion that we have about how do we best fight for women's liberation takes place in this context. And part of the new context, I think, is around what some people call the new sexism, but it's not new anymore. It's been around for a whole number of years. But that sense of the commodification of women's bodies, which has been an essential part of women's oppression for a long time. Pirelli calendar, you know, this is decades old, you know, using women's bodies to sell tires or anything else. But the sense of actually today, I think, because part of the struggles of the 60s and 70s, one, the right for women to be treated as autonomous sexual beings with desires and able to control her own body, that sense of actually this being absorbed by capitalism and so back at us in the way of raunch culture, in the way of actually sort of, you know, lap dancing is something cool and fun and ironic, and what's your problem with it? You must be a prude. Surely you want to be able to express your sexuality in this open way. And actually, all it is just a new way of commodifying and throwing back at us the most narrow, cliched images of what women's sexuality is. And I think this is something that that we sort of need to understand, that this new sexism sort of thing, this idea that it's ironic, this idea that really it's just a bit of a game because you've won your liberation, you know, you're equal now, is something I think we have to fundamentally reject. And, you know, so this idea that it's got a new twist, that it's about our choice and everything else, actually what raunch culture and this sexism means, it's less choice. It's very narrow parameters, if you like, of how women are meant to express themselves in the world. And I think something like the idea of comics, you know, the rape banter that's used, the idea that this is sort of, you know, there was one guy actually in Edinburgh Festival who actually walked away and didn't do his set because I think it was 2 or 3 comedians before him had just made rape jokes as their constant thing. And the idea that those two words can go together, I think, is something which tells you something about the state of the world today. But I think this is something, the idea, oh, well, it's only a joke, you know, it's something I think we have to fundamentally reject. And I think that if you can identify the problem of women's inequality, of discrimination, of oppression, that's the first step, obviously, because some people deny it exists. Then it's how do we get rid of it? How are we going to challenge it? And clearly for lots of people, feminism is a first stop. You know, for me it was this idea of, you know, feminism just is basically being against sexism, isn't it? It's about, what, you're one of these old bigot chauvinists, I'm a feminist, stuff you. And I think that sense that there's been different waves of feminism, you know, the late 19th century, the 60s and the 70s, and then it's more fragmented. And even throughout time, there's always been a very broad church, the ideas of feminism. They can mean anything from, you know, I remember going to one women's conference in the 70s where they didn't allow boy children in the creche, which I just think, you know, is appalling. I mean, a woman has given birth to these, you know, the idea that means she couldn't be at the conference because she happened to have had boy children. That's sort of one extreme, if you like. But at the same time, it can be somebody in the Labour Party, you know, somebody on a women's committee in a local council, somebody working in a rape crisis centre, you name it. There's, you know, it can mean a lot of things. But it's a very broad thing. But that's almost where people sort of come to and identify, if you like, that they're against sexism. But feminism can be such a broad church that even Theresa May calls herself a feminist when pushed, and she's worn one of the Fawcett Society t-shirts, you know, this is what a feminist looks like. And that's because, obviously, to be honest, you know, oppression does cut across class, doesn't it? All women are in some way affected, even Theresa May, who's part of the ruling class, because she's always getting commented on her hair, her shoes, her clothes. You know, the women at Westminster are some of the most powerful women in society, but they're, you know, there was The Sun ran its best of Breastminster, where it sort of, you know, judged the women's breasts in the MPs, you know. So this is sexism affecting these women. But then look at their class background. Do they have an interest in fighting for better pay for women workers? Do they have an interest in any of these things? Actually, it isn't that simple, is it? Because actually they have an interest in imposing austerity. They have an interest in keeping down pay. And when it comes to ideology about the family and women's rights to abortion and everything else, Tory women are no more likely to defend abortion rights than some of their Tory, I was going to call them Tory brothers, but let's call them Tory men. And so I think that we have to tease out more, really, what is going on in terms of what sort of politics can properly address women's oppression, explain it, all the better, if you like, to go forward and fight for something different. And so for the revolutionary socialist tradition, you know, I often face people saying, well, you know, Marxism, it's all very well if you're talking about the economy or profit or exploitation or crisis. That's what Marxism is about. But when it comes to oppression, because oppression affects people across classes, really your ideas don't fit, or you need more, you need something else. It isn't enough on its own. And I think this idea that oppression sort of works in some different sphere is something that I reject. I feel you can't really understand the true impact and burden of oppression, how to fight, if you don't see it in the context of class. Because there's a big difference between Theresa May and the sexism she suffers, and the women that I talked about in the first part, who are losing their job, losing access to welfare, etc., etc. It's very different. So to take class away, it actually it sort of underestimates, if you like, the real burden and the real experience of oppression, I think, in society. And I think when you look back over revolutionaries historically, whether it's Rosa Luxemburg, Clara Zetkin, Alexander Kollontai, or Trotsky, who said to understand the conditions of life, you have to see it through the eyes of a woman. The idea of understanding that those people who come, if you like, at the bottom of the pile, you can really understand what life is like if you try and look at it through their eyes. You see, our tradition has got something very important to say, both about explaining where oppression comes from, explaining that oppression isn't biologically predetermined or hardwired into us, nor is it something that's been a permanent feature of human society. In actual fact, it's quite a modern, if you like, feature of society that only rose up with the rise of class societies, which is only a very minority of the whole of human history. Is you have to start to look at how does it work. Now, we're materialists as revolutionary socialists, and so therefore we talk about how attitudes, if you like, to sexuality, to gender, to the family, etc., they flow from the structures in society. The ideas that we have about women or about men we're not born with them. They're not there when we pop out. Girls don't pop out thinking, I like pink princesses and I want to do this, that. Of course not. They're socialized, structured as they grow up in a world that is deeply sexist, that has these material structures, if you like, which put us in a place. And the key institution and structure in which women's oppression is rooted is the family. The idea of women are child bearers, that's biology, but that doesn't mean to say that we should get paid less, discriminated against, that our bodies should be used as commodities. That doesn't flow, there's no logic. But actually, within the family, it's seen as our sphere, isn't it, women's sphere, that this is really where, anything else is extra. What we're best at and we're natural at is looking after children and cleaning and dusting and whatever. This is the ideology, if you like. And I think that if we understand that, we can begin to say that we can begin to understand where women's oppression comes from. Now, I'm going to come back to that. But you see, when you in terms of the family, because you see other people look at the family, and some feminist thinkers do as well, and say actually what the family is about is women serving men, and that actually men benefit from this situation. They don't have to supposedly do the cleaning and whatever. And I think the idea of this, and sometimes that idea that sort of all men have a power over women, whether it is to do with their role in the family, whether it is because they get paid more than, because the corollary of women getting paid less is that men get paid a bit more, is that idea that all men really have some sort of power or interest, if you like, in oppressing all women. Patriarchy is a common word. Again, it can mean a lot of things, but effectively meaning all men have power over all women. And, I just think that when we start to look at the material basis for women's oppression, we have to reject an idea that sometimes can look like it explains how society appears, but actually for us as Marxists and the Socialists, we're always trying to say what things look like aren't necessarily what they really are. How Marx put in Capitalism, he said all science would be superfluous if the outward appearance and the essence of things directly coincided. I.e., you wouldn't need to explain everything if everything the way it looked was the way it really was. And I think we have to go below the idea of saying, is it really enough to explain women's oppression in modern capitalism just to say men benefit, men are in charge, all men have an interest in oppressing all women? I don't think it goes anywhere near explaining where we're at and how to go forward. But it's a very common argument, about, particularly in the family, that, maybe the long-term interests of women and men is to unite and fight and everything else, but the short-term interests that they can have. And I just think this rejects this sort of the notion that really to understand women's oppression is not enough to see the oppression being rooted in interpersonal relationships between individuals. It's expressed and articulated through interpersonal relationships. Of course, it's real. It's not the system that, commits domestic violence or rape or buys porn. It's men. But the fact is, you have to understand how that fits into the context of the system, how the system creates what's going on, and the structures that embed, if you like, sexism and discrimination are what's absolutely key. And therefore, the sense of seeing it just around individuals, I think, means that you lose a sense of the society as a totality. And if you look at society as a totality, you can see the role of the family as something which isn't there to service men. It's there to reproduce the next generation of workers, if you like, at the cheapest possible price for the ruling class. It's actually something that serves capital. It serves the ruling class. And in fact, you know, even though families look very different today than they did even 20 years ago, let alone 50 or 100 years ago, but the ideology of how the family should be and women's role in it is still potent. And the economic role the family plays in society is absolutely vital. And I mean, the Tories have put well themselves. I mean, David Cameron's been open about it. He said that, you know, the best welfare system of all, it's called the family. And what he means by that is actually, we shouldn't have to bother about giving all this money to the welfare state and everything else. We should just get the family to carry the burden, whether it's of the elderly, of people who are ill, people who have disabilities, bringing up children, you name it. The Tories and the ruling class don't want to put any money into the welfare state to support people. That's why they want to penalise people who have what they call extra children. You know, that means if you're signing on and you can't get a job and you happen to have more than 2 children, they want to make it so that you don't get child benefit for those kids, because they say, and this is only the people who will suffer, it's the children actually, but you know, that sense of actually, I think it's becoming more explicit, if you like, the role of the family under austerity, that is something that serves capital in this way. And so therefore the family isn't organised the way it is in order to deliver benefits to men. It's just about minimising the cost and to using an ideology, if you like, of saying this is women's role in order for us to do it. Because the family's a contradictory thing, isn't it? It's not just that we're put into families by force with guns at our head or because the Daily Mail tells us to. It's actually something that can be a nurturing, caring place in what is quite a competitive, brutal world. And for many people, expecting their family to find, you know, unconditional love and support and that sense of somewhere to be yourself. And it can be that for people, but it can also be a place, because there are so many expectations in the family for being the perfect world, like you see in adverts, that if this doesn't come through, it can be a place of violence. It can be a place where violence both against women and against children, neglect and everything else as well, happen. So it's a deeply contradictory thing. We're not forced to do it, but it's something that that many people look to. So that's why I'm not for placards saying down with the family. If you don't live in a family, you'll be free. Of course, it's not as simple as that. Actually, it's about how we break the structures, if you like, of society from which the family and everything evolved in order to create a different sort of world. So I think that men also have an interest in breaking up these structures. I don't think actually it's a wonderful thing that men are told from when they grow up they've got to be masculine, they've got to be, you know, a stud, they've got to be, you know, fight, they've got to be this, they've got to be that, they've got to dress a certain way and whatever, have short hair and, you know, you name it. There's all sorts of the stereotypes that men are supposedly meant to fulfill, and they're meant to provide for their family, and they're meant to be the person that means that, you know, their kids get clothed and everything else. And actually, you know, the longest hours that men work are when their partners just had a baby. You know, the suicide rates for men are greatest when they're unemployed as young men or when they retire. You know, the sense of not fulfilling the traditional role that they're meant to fill. So socialization and those sort of gender divisions actually also affect men. This doesn't negate the fact that women are oppressed as a gender, and that is entrenched, but we have to understand that actually for male workers, they have no interest in perpetuating, upholding or maintaining this system at all. In fact, it is in their interest. And it doesn't matter if you feel that, well, short term, maybe they get some benefits. If in the long term, it entrenches division, it is against everybody's interest, because actually in the long term unity, their objective interest. Now, this isn't about the consciousness of individual men, because actually consciously you might think, I mean, I often give the example of Northern Ireland where I grew up. Protestant workers traditionally got council homes, had a vote actually before Catholic workers, and actually often got paid a bit more. Protestant workers thought they were they thought they ran the place. They thought they were really privileged, you know, to be to be part of the chosen few in Northern Ireland, if you like. But actually they got paid less than both Catholic and Protestant workers in England, Scotland and Wales, because the division in the class actually enabled the bosses to pay them both less. And so that idea, this isn't about the consciousness of male workers saying, I know it's in my interest to unite with women and to not have women play this role. It's actually about their objective interest in society that is the key thing. And this is why, you know, it's constantly important to look at the bigger picture. And this is where I think certain things like privilege theory and things miss They see it much, that sort of theory looks at not structures, but looks at individual, both consciousness of people's perceptions of perhaps feeling privileged or powerful or benefiting in some way from being white in a racist society or being a man in a sexist society. But this isn't enough to either explain the genuine material roots of oppression, nor is it enough to talk about how we can challenge it. And I think those sorts of ideas, they actually end up following a logic, if you like, that sort of emphasis on identity or being part of the so-called dominant group or not, is it implies there's a unity of interest across gender, which I don't believe there is. I don't believe there's a unity of interest across men, and I don't believe there's a unity of interest across all women. And I think doing this, and let alone if you go into ever-decreasing circles of a unity of interest between, white women or black women or, LGBT people as opposed to straight people, you get ever-decreasing circles which fragments our side in a way that actually means it's more difficult for every one of us to fight back if you say those are the key divisions, if you like, in society. And I think that one thing that oppression doesn't do is actually lead you to have a unity. There is no pressure, if you're an oppressed person, whether it's as a woman or about your sexuality or your race or religion, they automatically feel an empathy and unity with other oppressed groups in society. It's just simply, there's no logic that necessarily means that you feel that. And we can see that in terms of divisions over recent migrant workers and racism, etc. There are all sorts of ideas that actually oppression doesn't, that it doesn't automatically lead to unity. This is in contrast to class. Now, as I've said, as Marxists, we're not reductionists. We don't reduce oppression to class because clearly it cuts across it. But we do say that actually that class is something that is, for me, it is the critical divide in society. It shapes oppression. It shapes the way it shapes how long you live, what you're going to die from, you name it. It shapes every aspect of your life. Class is very clear even in the media. People talk quite a lot about class, but not in the Marxist way. People talk about the feckless poor, don't they? Or they talk about chavs. Polly Toynbee would tell you about inequality and poverty, often very eloquently. But for Marxists, class is not just about inequality or the sort of job you do or the accent you've got or any of those things. It's actually a social relationship in society, whether you're somebody who has to go and sell their ability to labour in order to live, which will probably be the case for everybody in this room in terms of how you're going to survive, or do you live off the labour of somebody else who's had to sell the ability to labour to you. That's a social relationship. It's a dynamic thing. And actually, it gives you the picture of the whole of society where a tiny minority elite actually extract all their wealth from the majority of us going to work every day. Now, that social relationship means that actually it's an extra burden on women, the fact that they now work more, longer hours and more full-time jobs than ever before. 50% of the working class, near as damn it, women are today. Now, that can be an extra burden. It is. But actually, the key thing is, if you're now exploited, as well as oppressed, the exploitation is a burden, but it's also basically your access, as you're part of the social force that has power. It gives you collective power in a way that just being oppressed and having if you are atomized within a nuclear family or in any other part of your life, being a worker, being part of this collective force, this social force, is something absolutely unique. And why is it unique? Because the intrinsic objective interests of working class people is to unite, regardless of their consciousness, forced to, in struggle to fight. And that means they're forced to overcome division. Now, I'm not arguing for a minute that this means, a one-day strike and suddenly nobody's sexist or homophobic or racist or anything. Of course not. But actually, the experience of struggle, the experience of being forced to fight and to try and unite against your boss or management or the government or whatever, means that you're forced to actually try to overcome those divisions within the class. And, women's oppression being the oldest and most deeply rooted oppression, it's going to take the longest and the most dramatic, huge social upheavals to challenge. But nevertheless, this is the way that it can be changed. And I think this struggle is really the way forward, if you like, that you can see the ability to be able to not only fight for reforms in the here and now. The biggest demonstration for abortion rights was in 1979, organised by the unions, by the TUC, where they saw abortion not being a women's issue, but being a class issue. It was magnificent. 80,000 people. It was the biggest demo I've been on at the time, and it was just brilliant. Now, the sense of that was actually identifying that actually people fought as a class for something that they knew attacked their class more. It affected working class women more. And that sense of how this can be, how the class can work, to give us the power to challenge things that we couldn't do as individuals, I think is absolutely vital. I don't believe that there's two struggles. You know, on one railway track, there's this struggle against oppression that perhaps women organise on their own, or black people organise on their own, and there's this other struggle against capitalism, against exploitation, that we can all do separately. I feel that there isn't two separate fears. Oppression is rooted, grows from, is a product of capitalism, and therefore the struggle against the system gives you the power to be able to challenge oppression in the everyday, as well as, for the first time, start to think about having a society, being able to create a society where there is no oppression at all. Otherwise, we're constantly just going to be fighting the symptoms and not actually fighting at the cause of where this came from. And, you know, it's been the case that maybe in past meetings years ago, you wouldn't have had concrete examples from the here and now. We do. In terms of women workers in Britain, I mean, the pension strike just over a year ago in November was the biggest strike of women workers ever to be seen in Britain. It was magnificent, and the confidence and the militancy of women workers at the heart of that. I mean, to be honest, it's an absolute scandal that the trade union leaders didn't carry on that fight, because we could have won on that one. There's no doubt about it. People were determined, and they would have been able to win in that. But it shows you what the working class looks like today, and it shows you the power that women can feel they've got as part of that class. The other example is the revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa. These are early days of the revolutions, and women have not yet got anything like equality, but they have been a part of that struggle and are constantly being a part of that struggle. And in fact, are suffering, if you like, really bad attacks, if you like, from thugs, the state, and the forces of counter-revolution, in order to try and break them from the revolutions, in order to make them fear being part of the struggles. And this is something that people are organising against. But it shows you the scale and the nature of the ability, if you like, of women and men to fight back in a way that really we haven't seen for a very long time. So my final point is that when I argue that actually the organised collective power of workers is the way forward, both to fight women's oppression and to fight for a different sort of society, this is not me saying that the working class should go out and fight on behalf of women. We are half the class. And so for me, it's about saying this is where women can find their power. This is where women can find the ability to be able to fight back. And I mean that about every oppressed group. Is actually, you know, it was said in the last meeting on Lenin about, you know, us being the tribune of the oppressed, and I believe that is what we should be. But I think this is where the class can actually find its ability to be able to lead a struggle, which can give us a different world, to build a society where, get rid of a system which treats us as commodities, which makes us disposable, which is only interested in who or what can generate a profit. And I think in that sort of struggle, we can become not the mere objects of history, but can shape our own lives. And actually, you know, when Marx said the emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class, that's it. Emancipation, liberation, not just about equality, more than that, a true liberation for women and all oppressed groups in society. Thanks, I'll leave it there.
Quick question really, like for Judith as well as the room, which is about abortion attacks, because obviously we know that this has kind of like an ideological role for the Tories because of, you know, where they get their support from and where they get their voters from. But is there like a material reason behind it? Does it materially benefit the ruling class to have, you know, working class women unable to control, you know, their own bodies and sort of like, you know, is there a material benefit in it for the ruling class, but for working class women to have more children?
I think one of the things that I always had a problem with when I started looking into feminism and stuff like that a few years back was the fact that no explanation was ever given to where oppression comes from, and concomitant to that was the idea that there's a system next to economic structure called patriarchy that exists outside of the economic structure and has always existed in this way. And I think we need to be really strong on resisting the idea that women's oppression is eternal and has always been the case. First of all, because it's historically incorrect, and there have been societies where women have had quite prominent positions, but also it's politically paralysing, because if, you know, women's oppression is eternal and naturally disposed to treat women in quite shit ways, then unless we do some crazy sort of eugenic stuff, we've got no chance of emancipation. So I think that argument always has to be, you know, firmly rejected. And I think it's important to analyse women's oppression in terms of class, because it shapes the fight back. And also you can see the relation between women's oppression and class, especially in the economic crisis when violence and sexual assaults against women increase in an economic crisis, and also I've got a question, and like anyone else can come back on this as well. I think there's something really worrying starting to happen in terms of not only do people no longer think women's oppression exists, but people are really beginning to think that men are oppressed, at a higher level by gender than women. So at King's, we just had to fight off in council an introduction of a men's liberation officer, and people, and at UCL as well, a man's running for the women's officer position with the intention to dissolve the position because he doesn't think it's necessary to have a women's liberation officer. And the worrying thing is, like in council, when we had to fight against the men's liberation officer, we won the vote by about 3 people. We rejected the motion by about 3 people. So I think, this argument that men are oppressed on a greater extent than women is really starting to catch some ground, and it's quite worrying. And I want to know what other people think about that and like ways of tackling that sort of argument.
Just to get back on what you were saying, Shanice, I've heard the argument that if we focus on gender, if we have things like a women's officer, then you're creating inequality because why are you choosing to focus on our differences? Why don't you just have, I saw the thread saying, why don't we have an equalities officer? Why do we not? I mean, this argument is actually quite dangerous. What's next? Are we going to have a straight pride parade and a white history month? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I think what people need to realise is we didn't create these differences, society has, and we're trying to respond back to it. I mean, the idea that we need a man's officer, I can't imagine what kind of liberation he needs to be fighting for, because the examples that they give is always kind of, I see, it's kind of born from the oppression that women have, because there are gender roles that exist that say men are strong and they have to go out. So when they bring up examples that men have to go fight in war, that's due to sexism, where women actually are told to stay at home, or men have to go out and work and women have to stay in. Again, that's due to sexism, that's against women. They just seem to try to look at it from a different way, and I guess it's a really interesting argument that comes from, I think they might have lost the argument that sexism doesn't exist anymore, because even in our campuses that's very much a really ridiculous argument. But now it's how can we stop focusing on oppressed groups, because suddenly white straight men are oppressed because we're not looking at it in the ways that they could be oppressed on our campuses as well, which I think, again, it's ridiculous. But really just have to bring it back to, well, like you said, where does oppression come from? How does oppression affect us on our campuses and societies? And, really loads of the examples that Judith has brought up, because I don't hear examples of, I do a science degree, and one of the, in our open day on another campus, someone made a joke about how very little women do a physics degree, and the chancellor makes a joke saying, oh, the odds are women, the odds are in your favour, even if the odds are odd. I don't really know, but again, it's just these people just like playing off. We have like pimps and hoes nights on our SUs, and we're told we're being, ridiculous for opposing them, which really actually I wanted to ask or bring up a discussion on this idea of choice and the rise of raunch culture. So there was a discussion last year in Tower Hamlets about a lap dancing club being opened up, and those licenses being given. There was also a discussion about how that's just a normal business license and not in any way kind of pornographic one. So I wanted to say, what are the kind of arguments people can have? Because at one, you don't want to go up to a woman and be like, no, you're being oppressed, don't do this, because it's very patronising, I understand. But I don't know how they can understand that, going to a lap dancing class or participating in these kind of societies or clubs where it's not what you think or what you say, it's how you're presenting your body. More than anything, it's how you're presenting your body to men. I don't really know how to have these arguments without being seen as a second wave feminist or a radical prude. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to come in and follow that. I want to start by saying that actually the women's question is essential and should always be a central wedge of the party's politics. And I'll come on to explain how I mean that. I think Judith does very well to distinguish between the different contexts that have existed, the different definitions of why people may associate themselves to be feminists, i.e. feminism is often held as a position against sexism, and therefore they identify with feminism. And I think that's a very strong definition now. Doesn't necessarily mean that they hold feminism in terms of they're separatist or they believe in patriarchy theory and all these other questions. But there is one danger here, and the danger is that actually when we start to open that debate up, when we talk about what is the actual context, what is the definition of feminism in the movement now, if we start counterposing that question by saying actually people like Theresa May are part of the ruling class, they're bourgeois, and therefore they essentially work against the whole idea against women's liberation. Because for example, if we use Diane Abbott, which might be a slightly better example, who we work with, in UAF and all these other campaigns, then I don't think that would necessarily have the same meaning, because essentially, if women are being attacked from the right, we stand with women, whether they're in the ruling class or whether they're in the working class. Now, we will at some point have different questions and arguments against or with them, but we should always stand in the maximum possible unity to unite against the right. And I think when we don't do that, what ends up happening is that we kind of filter down this kind of defensive stance, and what ends up happening is the conclusion of that is a caricatured or obscured position, which then inhibits our complete ability to have an argument not just inside the party, but also how we shape that on the outside of the party. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to always focus on the broadest possible forces, and that's the objective situation. So in terms of the women's movement or feminist movement, whether there is one or isn't, that's a debate, but we always have to constantly be engaging and debating and arguing and working with the people on the outside of the party, while taking the arguments on the class distinctions as much as possible. Because if we're an actual Bolshevik party, then we need to be going to ordinary working class people. We need to have a maximum audience, and therefore we can't counterpose equality against class. And I don't think we can also be saying that we think that the root of oppression ends through, or is a start ending through revolution, but at the same time we have to fight here and now, because when you start doing that, you start counterposing women's liberation with the sum total of revolution, which then means that we're not fighting here and now, and therefore we take an indirectly fatalist approach by not getting involved with the movements outside. I wanted to also say that the whole Kolontai says that actually we fight on two fronts. We fight on one inside the party, one outside of the party. And the direct result of that is when you fight inside the party on a certain position, which should be happening, it directly affects what happens on the outside of the party. And I think there's another also very important question when we're talking about this here today, is that not just necessarily what you say means what happens in practice. For example, Lenin said, what you do doesn't mean what you say doesn't mean what you always do. I have one question for Judith. If a call was made not by our organisation, but say feminists or femtox or whatever, on the question of unpaid labour in the family home, would we support that or not?
Sorry, just a question. Do you think that there's a danger that by blaming the capital for sexism and saying that sexism comes from capitalism, that we're sort of taking away from the responsibility of men? For example, when a man rapes a woman, it is the man ultimately raping the woman, and it's not society isn't while men may be pressured to be more sexist by society or whatever, ultimately the man is the one doing the rape. And do you think that by blaming capitalism for sexism, we're taking away that responsibility of men?
Okay, I wanted to respond to some of the things that Arnie said. First of all, I think you always have to be careful about quoting people out of context. So when you talk about Kolontai talking about a fight inside and outside the party, She was dealing with conditions during the Russian Revolution in 1917, where the Bolsheviks became the mass party of the working class. 1 in 10 Russian workers were in the Bolshevik party. That inevitably meant, particularly given the predominantly male character of the working class, that a lot of the sexist prejudices of workers came into the party, and that gave a particular importance to fighting for an understanding of women's oppression within the party. Unfortunately, we're a much smaller organisation, much more ideologically homogenous. I'm not saying that sexism isn't an issue within small revolutionary parties as well, but it's a different kind of problem. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, does the SWP take up the question of women's oppression in concrete ways in the here and now? Absolutely we do. We have a very strong record of fighting, for example, to defend and extend abortion rights over the decades. We participated in the slut walk demonstrations, despite the reservations that other people on the left had about them. But thirdly, it's very important to bring in play the question of class, because it does make a difference, and it's important to distinguish between Theresa May and Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott is a reformist politician who reflects the contradictory pressures of the ruling class and her working class constituency in how she approaches politics. Theresa May is part of the ruling class. Sure, there can be disgusting sexist comments about how she dresses and things like that, but the critical question, so she can be a victim in certain contexts of women's oppression, but critically, the critical question is unity with Theresa May going to advance the struggle against women's oppression? And the answer to that is no, because she's locked in. I'll come to Diane Abbott, but it's important to start with Theresa May. Theresa May is part of the ruling class. Theresa May is prepared to make token concessions to women's equality, but she's incapable of challenging the whole interlocking structure of class and oppression that keeps women oppressed. Diane Abbott, of course, is going to be much better on these kinds of questions. When you say, do we have unity with Diane Abbott, it's a non-question. I've spoken on the same platform as Diane Abbott on the question of the war. We're constantly working together with someone like Diane Abbott. But even then, because she's in the Labour Party, there are major differences about strategy and how we approach these questions. And the crucial thing is we can never put aside the way in which class and oppression interlock to produce the oppression of women. If we try and separate out the two, we'll end up in alliances that won't in any way advance the emancipation of women.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just coming back a bit to sort of this idea that there's a lot of people now, I think, particularly when women's rights are seen like a renewed attack, both in terms of the kind of raunch culture stuff and also like with the way that austerity is impacting in that. That it's absolutely right that there's there's a lot of women now who I think identify with the ideas of feminism as a kind of as a way of challenging the oppression that they see, and that there's lots of people who I think identify themselves as feminists who maybe wouldn't fully take on sort of ideas of patriarchy. And actually, if you look at any workplace, like the women that identify themselves as feminists in those situations, usually are the best fighters in any union or whatever. The people who have an understanding of oppression, that they're able to transfer that to being against homophobia. The example in a school with one woman worker who identified herself as feminist had a big poster against homophobia up in her door. Also able to transfer that to being against racism, have a bit more of a generalised understanding. But I think it's important for socialists to obviously work with feminists and be involved in all the movements that we are involved with, working alongside feminists against against sexism and the impacts of it. But it's also important to actually take up the arguments that women who maybe initially identify with feminism to actually say, well, there's a difference between feminist ideology and the conclusion that leads you to about how you actually change the sexism that exists and what Marxists have to say about that, and that so therefore it's important for us to be working alongside feminists and identifying with them in lots of ways, but also taking up arguments about what our actual strategy is, because I remember my mum actually, who was a teacher, she's recently retired, telling a story about, this was a few years ago, it wasn't that long ago, about a strike at our school where you had the admin workers in the office who are some of the lowest paid workers inside the school were striking against the tax on their very low pay, and on that day the boss, who was a woman, the head teacher, crossed the picket line, went in and tried to do the work of all these women in one day to try and undermine their attempt for better pay, when actually her pay is about 7 or 8 times what they're on. And that's of course we should identify with feminists, but challenge and say that actually we have a strategy that's not about focusing on just working with other women against sexism, but about putting forward an argument for how we can change things, because it comes on, I suppose, a bit to the question that Judith raised in her talk about how much the working class men really benefit. And I think those arguments where people say, well, there's an element of privilege that working class men have that working class women don't have, is a really unhelpful way to look at things, because I think there's other people in this room as well who've been on the Sparks demonstrations, but being thrown down on some of them. Initially you were met with some of the most not nice sexism from some of these workers that were in struggle fighting back against their bosses, but actually in the process of going down there week on week, and to come back on the question somebody said about by pointing to saying that the sexism is written in the system, does that mean you sort of alleviate blame in some way? I think absolutely, as socialists you have to be challenging every single instance of sexism when you come up against it inside the movement, but actually it's going to be through struggling together collectively as a class that we're going to be able to begin to break down these things, and in the process of that struggle, that's how we're going to shape the society that we're hoping to build.
I guess just something about the importance of understanding where oppression comes from and our argument around that, because I think some people have mentioned it, and there's been an idea that we accept this general argument that we put around the origins of women's oppression coming out of the rise of class society, going back several thousand years and all this. But what I find interesting is when you read other kind of Marxist feminists or people who do look to Marx in lots of ways to understand society today, to understand how we can change it, actually they don't look to Engels and his work on the origins of the family and stuff like that. And I think it's important that we do, because we understand oppression as coming out of something to do with the needs of a developing kind of class society and the beginnings of the modern idea of the family and stuff. That it wasn't about men getting together, having a meeting and deciding to dominate women. It was something that came out of who started to own the new means of production, how society came to be organised, and the changes that took place and stuff. Because I think also when you read other writers now, you kind of do get that sense from them that if we look to Engels, then what we're saying is oppression arose with class, therefore you've got to wait for class to go before oppression will go, so basically sit back and wait for the revolution. And I think the argument for Engels 150 years ago and for us now is, who is sitting around waiting for the revolution? This isn't what we do. What we do is not separate out the fight against oppression from the whole fight, the class fight against the system. Not just because we don't want to and it's more convenient to have one fight rather than two, but because you can't end the system and you can't end oppression finally without having that total fight. And that means dealing with the working class as it actually exists, with all those contradictory ideas, all of those divisions, the racism, the sexism, the various kinds of backward ideas that can exist in all kinds of forms, and constantly fighting against those things in order to build unity and build those struggles. Because a revolution can't happen without that unity coming in, into being. It's not that you have to get the unity first and then the revolution will happen, but that the process of a revolution being successful is a process of overcoming those divisions inside of the working classes and stuff like that. So I think that if people say to us, you just say focus on trade unions or whatever, focus on the economy and wait for the revolution, that will just automatically resolve all the problems. You need to say there is nothing automatic about this process. It's something that has to be fought every step of the way, and that means taking on every manifestation of oppression, wherever we find it.
Yeah, just wanted to come back on the earlier question really about individual responsibility. The fact that we live in a grossly sexist, racist, unequal society doesn't make it okay. It doesn't excuse people who behave in that fashion. If you can't just say society is to blame, you have to take individual responsibility for things. I don't think there's any suggestion that we would give somebody a pass because we live in a racist society that they commit a racist murder. It reminds me really of a song Bob Dylan sang many years ago about the murder of Medgar Evers, a civil rights activist, a black civil rights activist in the USA. The man who murdered him, the song describes him as a pawn in their game, but it doesn't say that he wasn't to blame. It doesn't say that we should forgive him because he was a pawn in their game. People are affected in all sorts of ways by our society, and some of them are very horrible. But we still have to recognise that people do have individual responsibility.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I was going to ask another question. Even though no one answered my first one. But it's like, I think it's, because our feminist society at our university at the moment they've got this big thing about the statistics on rape within the US Army, I think. And I've got a question, which is how do we as revolutionaries engage with that? Because obviously, I'm against rape, right? But at the same time, we know that the army, as well as the police force, tends to encapsulate most of the reactionary ideas in society. So, I don't want to, and apart from that, it's a tool for imperialism. So I don't want to just reform the army. I don't want the army to exist. But how do we engage with that argument? And yeah, that's for the rest of the room as well.
We've got time for a couple more questions.
Just something that I was thinking about, because it was because I think somebody mentioned about sort of like pole dancing societies and stuff like that. I do have female friends who sort of not revolutionary certainly, but who do see that as very, very liberating. And I was just wondering what anybody's opinion on it is, because as a man, because on the one hand, it's not my business to be telling a woman what isn't sexist, but on the other hand, I do want to be able to say this is what I think about where oppression comes from. But I don't know how do you sort of engage with that?
Thank you.
I just wanted to come up about the US Army. I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think the answer is partly you have to be against oppression wherever it manifests itself. And if women soldiers in the US Army are being raped and in other ways sexually assaulted, then we have to be against that. We have to be absolutely consistent. I suppose the other thing is, from a purely pragmatic point of view, since the US Army is, as you say, an instrument of imperialist oppression on a very large scale, the more the sort of corrosion of equality and resistance to oppression gets into it, the less effective an instrument it will be. In many ways, my favourite moment in the history of the US Army is during the Vietnam War, when particularly black conscripts would kill their officers, engaging in fragging and things like that. Now, there's not a comparable solution to rape inside the US Army, but I think that they're both principles and strategic reasons why you want to take a very hard position against it.
Oh, sorry. The army thing sounds quite similar to the problem that arises around gay marriage, and how you want gay people to be able to get married on equal terms to straight people, but they're still buying into the institution of the family, which really, and I guess, to reiterate what Alex says, the line does have to be challenged oppression and any sort of oppressive institution, but you maintain a critical approach. And I just wanted to really quickly draw out what Umna said about gendered issues that men face, having their roots in the rise of women's oppression through class society and the institution of family. So like, if you look in America, if you count people getting raped in prisons, it turns out that more men are raped because there's a vast prison population. But if you look to who in prisons are getting raped, if you're transgendered male to female, then there's a 69% chance that in prison you'll be sexually assaulted or raped. And I think that just goes to show, even within prisons and in that sort of environment, the very gendered basis of sexual assault, and therefore the roots of even that when it affects men and when it affects people in a male-dominated institution, having its roots in women's oppression. And also, the fact that men are less likely to get custody for their children. Well, that comes back to the fact that women have always been presented as the sole child bearer, the primary caregiver. And so I think when we're tackling on campuses arguments around men being oppressed by gender, it's always important, and this is why our analysis of women's oppression is so important, to bring it back to that historical analysis. Say, actually, this is where it comes from. It comes from the systematic and institutional oppression of women.
Just sort of back to when someone mentioned the lap dancing classes. It is sort of the question, what I suppose I'd like to pose to everyone, because a woman wears a short skirt or goes to a lap dancing session, for instance, is she shitting on feminism and everything that's come in the past, or is she just embracing her sexuality? Just a question.
You had a brief comment,
and
then
just in kind of a short reply, I agree with Alex completely on the question of Theresa May, but I think the problem sometimes you might have is if you hold on to that and kind of maximalise that. Colonto started in 1905, so she went through various stages of conditions, and the problem with that is that if we start saying that the conditions here are too low and therefore we shouldn't strive beyond the basic party operations, is that we never get a chance to make those alliances and get to the point where sometimes we have to break from alliances with these people. If we don't try, therefore we can't make alliances.
All right, okay, lots of questions. I'll try to come back in them on. First of all, the stuff about Theresa May and feminism and unity and all the rest of it. I have got a lot against Theresa May, but not the fact she's a woman. I actually want rid of her, I want to attack her, I do not want her to be able to walk free and be in charge, but it's not because she's a woman, that's it, Now, if people say, oh, she's wearing her kitten heels, I say that's sexism, it's disgusting. And, sexism against anybody is wrong. But I tell you what, she has an interest in perpetuating the sexism that she sometimes gets inflicted on her. She has an interest in imposing unequal pay. She has an interest in imposing the idea that women in the family should carry the extra burden. She is not a sister. We have nothing in common with her apart from biology. She has a womb, I have a womb. That's it. And therefore that sense of we are against sexism when it's said against people in the ruling class, but oh boy, is she going to be part of a struggle to get rid of it? Not at all. She is part of a class that wants to perpetuate, maintain it, and if anything, increase it. So when we talk about fighting with other people against oppression, absolutely, but we're not going to be fighting with her against oppression. We're going to be fighting against her with other women and men in our class, whether they're in the SWP or outside the SWP, in other groups or not. And I don't believe for a minute, Arnie, we fight with other people all the time. I've been on the Abortion Rights Executive for 5 years. Believe me, they're not all revolutionary socialists. Funnily enough, they come from the Labour Party, not the Labour Party, they come from other left groups, they're feminists, you name it. And we fight because we all have one thing in common. We want to defend and extend abortion rights. Absolutely fundamental for revolutionaries. Every single issue. We are there. We want the maximum. It's like fighting the Nazis. Do we just say SWP against the Nazis? Not at all. We say we need to fight with people in the Labour Party, people in the trade unions, the broadest possible front to beat the Nazis, because on our own we're not strong enough to do it. We have to build in the class, and that's what we do around issues of women's liberation as well. Whether it's the slut walks, whether it's about equal pay or fighting for nursery provision in workplaces, all of these issues, we are central to them, but we also work with other people around them. And I think that when we come to some of the issues, you see, somebody was sort of saying, isn't women's rights just human rights? Isn't the same thing? You see, that's true on one level, but actually, if you just say it like that, then it's just as if there's no oppression, that there isn't inequality, that women aren't treated, in a different way, and women are discriminated against. Oppression does exist. And therefore, you have to say, you fight on those issues. It isn't just that we're all equal. If it was literally, you see, if there was gender equality in the world, but capitalism still existed, it would mean that every top level of, in the top of the judiciary in Parliament would be 50-50, wouldn't it? It'd be 50-50 in every job. It would be 50-50 in jobs on the minimum wage. And if that was the case, then all you'd be doing was fighting capitalism, wouldn't it? Fighting the system. But actually, oppression is in there. There isn't extra inequality for women. And therefore, it isn't just simply to say we fight on everything. It's actually you take up those issues of oppression, and whether it's about any of the things I've just said. And I mean, within the SWP, we're absolutely fundamentally opposed to any form of oppression, and have the highest standards. And if you want to talk to me about the case afterwards, then I will, because I think that sense of us taking it really seriously, both within our organisation, but also how we fight on the outside. There's not a separation of the two, and I don't believe for a minute that my understanding of actually this is rooted in capitalism is an excuse for anything goes, and let's just wait for the revolution, then we'll all be better people. Not at all. We fight every expression of sexism, of racism, of homophobia every day, whether it's about posters at work, whether it's about a comment or a joke, whether any aspect of it, behaviour, structures, we absolutely have to fight in the here and now. Because every struggle in the here and now can actually make something different. It makes a difference if there's legal abortion rights. It makes a difference if there's certain laws enforced so that women can have maternity leave, for goodness sake. Women used to have to give birth virtually on the factory floor. Reforms within capitalism make a difference. We want them, not just because every struggle helps us feel stronger for the bigger struggles, because they can actually make a difference in the here and now. I believe I want to make them a better place now, not just in the future. But I'm not satisfied with that. I want to have a world where we're not constantly fighting against the bad things, where we can actually create an utterly different sort of society. And this is where it comes to things like, you asked what would I say about women being paid for unpaid labour in the family. See, the thing is, I fight for and defend welfare benefits, child benefits, all the things they want to take away from people. But do I think liberation for women is to get wages for their housework, which is what the campaign always was called? I don't think that is a way forward. That's not how socialism will be. That it will still be seen as the woman's sphere to do the housework, but she'll get some extra money for it. I want to see that completely thrown in the air, where these things will be socialised, where the idea that it wouldn't just be every nuclear family has to have its washing machine, has to have its this, that and the other, and therefore they're cooking and looking after the kids in a narrow nuclear atomised way. I want to see something different. So absolutely fighting for the right for people to have maternity and paternity leave, because I think actually that would help break down divisions in terms of women having to take the primary role over children, but not that actually that is the answer in the future. I think that would further institutionalise, if you like, the idea that the family is the women's sphere, rather than being something extra. Now, just on the stuff about the men's, officers and stuff, this is part of the lie, isn't it? That now we've got equality, and then maybe we have to worry about the boys now, maybe we have to worry about the men, and this, well, number one, it's constantly trying to pit us against each other, isn't it? Whatever it is, it's always about us fighting against each other instead of saying who's the main beneficiary of all of this. But it's a nonsense. That's what I started the meeting with, the deep inequality that actually exists in the here and now. And that has to be the challenge to the idea that there's no need for, women's officers and talking about women's oppression anymore. There is a need to talk about women's oppression. There is inequality. And therefore, the idea that it's all different now and it's just a nonsense. But of course, this is what the ruling class try and tell us all the time. What are you worried about? Or they say it's political correctness gone mad, don't they? Anything you want to fight for equality, it's like, oh, well, that may have been, years ago there may have been inequality, but now there isn't. And this is absolutely not true at all. And I think this thing about that we have it all is something that I think in many ways, but I said the ideas about fighting for women's oppression, fighting against women's oppression today, are some old arguments, but in a very different context. It is actually because women do have more rights than they had in the 60s and 70s with the second wave women's movement. It creates different pressures as well, doesn't it? And one of them is around the thing that people have raised about lap dancing and this being a new choice and another commodity. I think it is sold to us as choice and commodity. And therefore it means it is this other thing, it's the other side, if you like. When somebody said, does that mean you don't, that men, you can do anything and you just say it's a system? No, you fight with people, they can have you can win people to different ideas and different behaviours. But in terms of, when it comes to women and in terms of women who work in lap dancing clubs and things, I think we have to be careful. We're not attacking those women when you say you don't want, more lap dancing clubs and everything. It's not about the women themselves. It's about a culture that says this is what liberated sexuality looks like. No, I'm sorry, that's not what liberated sexuality looks like. But they have, basically what the system has done is absorb the idea that women have got a right to freedom to express themselves sexually, which was something, which was unheard of really in terms of open culture before the 60s and 70s, into something that means, it's your choice if you want to have a pole down. I mean, I think it's unbelievable that in college students' unions that there is pole dancing societies, because that's come completely from the sex industry, as they call it, which is where women's bodies are sold in a really open way. And I think this is something we've got to completely say, this isn't about extra choice, it's about another commodity. It's our sexuality becoming a commodity in a different way. And I think we have to, I know the stuff around Tower Hamlets about you're saying about the getting the different licenses. I think, these aren't just like a coffee shop, it is different. But I do think it's all the time as well, not finding ourselves in terms of making this moral judgment on the women who may have no other choice but to try and get that job. They are not the enemy, and actually they're not the people that we should take the fight up against at all. But I think it shows how the system is spitting out, if you like, pretending it's liberating, pretending it's something new and fantastic, when actually it's same old sexism sold with a different label, sold as being something that is free and without all the hang-ups of before. I mean, just on the army, I think, Alex answered it, but I think what we've got to also see is things like the army and the police they brutalise people in order for them to be all the better at their job, don't they? What do they do with young recruits in the army? They break them, basically, don't they? Those were all the boot camps, the reality shows and everything else. Break them, break any bit of humanity about having them, to turn them into guns, basically. Humans with guns. And therefore, I think what you see in the army and the police is some of the worst excesses of homophobia, sexism and everything else. And actually, so therefore it doesn't surprise me. I think it was almost probably worse than general society in terms of rape and sexual harassment within the army, because that's the way that they've been created, if you like, to be, it does brutalise people. And I think, as well as they are a tool of the state, a tool of imperialism to go and crush and oppress other countries, and therefore you see the worst excesses of it. I think that in terms of your question about abortion and does it suit the ruling class, you see, I think the Tories and the ruling class have a contradictory role now. They do not want women to be back in the family. They do not want women to be utterly full-time housewives or anything, because women play a really important role as a part of the working class. It's not a temporary thing. They're a permanent part of the working class. They are needed. And therefore, but what they do want to do is they want us to juggle, to square the circle, that is full-time work plus the state and society not taking responsibility for the next generation, for people with disabilities, people who are ill, the elderly, etc. And so therefore, ideologically, I think it plays a role to make us feel like, we're not in control of ourselves, and therefore we are defined, if you like, by our biology, by our ability to have children. And this is where you see, I think, you've got the ideological right wing of the Tories who want to go on about abortion rights. I don't think in the end, there's a public majority, if you like, for legal abortion. There's still people living. I've seen them on abortion, talk to them, abortion rights demonstrations, who remember when it was like, when abortion was illegal, but women died through backstreet abortions. There's a memory of that. So I think, I wouldn't be complacent, but I think if there was a real attack going on, there would probably be a really big response from below. But I do think it suits ideologically for it to constantly, to feel like women's rights are, under threat, if you like. And these people are allowed to give vent to this in order to bolster the right of the Tory party to make them think, maybe we can push it back. But ultimately, they're caught between an ideology of the sort of looking of how the family should be, but in reality they know women are working and they're trying to juggle, and we are forced to square the circle in our own lives for what the system has thrown us into. And so my final point is this, you see, the thing about gay marriage, the contradictions. Because yes, the fact that the army, men go into battle, majority, there is some women but minority, or gay marriage is, marriage, I've said, an institution of capitalism and everything else, is actually, you could have equality where everybody could have a marriage, women can be 50-50 in the army at every level and all the rest of it. But ultimately what it shows you, that fighting for equality of gender is not enough to change the world. Because you could have all those things, but will that be socialism? Will that be a better society? It'll be a less gender discriminating society, but if class is still there, you have got a deeply unequal, repressive, oppressive society. And that's why, as socialists, we say it isn't enough to talk about equality. Equality with who? Theresa May wants equality. She wants equality with George Osborne. But if I'm fighting for equality, who am I? Am I fighting for equality with George Osborne, or am I fighting for equality with one of you, or a hospital porter on the minimum wage? You know, you cannot talk about equality, genuine liberation and equality, without actually uprooting the system and actually creating a very, very different system. So for me, it's about uprooting the system in which this is in which oppression comes from. It's a product of it, while every single day challenging sexism, homophobia, racism, challenging the oppressive ideas and structures that you know, how it comes out into day-to-day society. But until we get rid of capitalism and the system from below by us, then actually we'll not be able to really turn the vision, if you like, the potential of what society could be without oppression into a reality.